Hello, everyone. Good to see you all popping in there. We're just as per usual. I know we're a few minutes after the 8 o'clock already, but we're going to give it about 30 seconds to a minute just to see if anyone else joins us. There's a lower number to ratio to packs that went out than usual, but I don't know if that's because it's a Monday night. But we'll yeah, plenty of people can watch back on the recording. So
quality,
yeah,
not
really.
quantity.
Exactly. And there's some great, I can see like Martin and Keith and Dave. There's some good heavy hitters in the whiskey taste on there listening in. So good to see you folks. This is I'm not just saying this now, James, because we have you here and we're about to start a tasting, but Kilchoman over recent years has quickly become one of my favorite distilleries on the island. So yeah, I've been even since we did the last virtual tasting last year, we're looking forward to this one. So unfortunately, although there's some fantastic samples in this lineup, no Sanig, which is one of my favorite whiskies. But
yeah, well, there's plenty more at the distillery that are new vatting today, so don't worry, we're not going to run out yet. It has been quite popular though, so we can only grow by a certain amount next year. Otherwise, we might be in a bit of trouble. But yeah,
there's
making whiskey.
Yeah,
should have gone into the gin game. Much easier.
Much easier. Turn it, horse it all out in 3 weeks, be grand. But so we might actually just start there, since no one seemed to have joined in the waiting room there for the last few minutes. So sorry, I clicked the wrong button on my laptop. So perfect. Well, James, thank you for joining us. For those of you listening in who are either watching live or watching the recording, who don't know, I'm Luke Holland. Oh, there's someone added in, so there you are. I'll just wait for him to join, and then we'll go. Vitaly, good to see you join. You're the late as always, but it's good to see you on there. Folks, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Luke. I manage the Celtic Whisky Bar and Larder and Irish Whisky Experience down in Clarny. We're welcome to night number 8 of the Celtic Whisky Fest. So I hope those of you who bought multiple tickets to the different events are enjoying them all. As they've been popping up. As I just mentioned there, really excited tonight to be tasting, to be joined by James and tasting some Kilchoman. I suppose the last thing to say is as always, for those of you who know, and then for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we just throughout the whole thing, we do want to hear your questions, your tasting notes, everything. Please do. This is meant to be interactive, so please do get them in the chat, and we'll address them as and when. So James, do you want to introduce yourself and the tasting?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm James Wills from Kilchoman. I am I'm part of the family that own and operate Kilchoman Distillery. I don't know how important that makes me, but there we go. And so my father built the distillery in 2005, and me and my two brothers, we're kind of, I guess these days we run the sort of sales and marketing side of the company. And I'm over on Ireland just now, but based in Edinburgh, but I spend a lot of time over on Islay, checking in with my dad and stuff. So I'm over on Islay just now, and we're gonna taste 5 whiskies. I'm gonna just post. I don't know if people watching this not live can see the comments. So basically, the order we're gonna taste the whiskies in is gonna be the 100% Islay, and then the Loch Gorm, the PX Sherry Matured, and then the Saturn Single Cask, Saturn Finish Single Cask, and then we're going to finish with Feish Ela at the end. So 5 whiskies, and hopefully you get a good sort of idea for who we are, what we do by the end of those 5 drams. What I'm going to do is, so that you don't have to stare at me the whole way through, I'm just going to put on like a presentation which is just images that are just going to roll. So there's no PowerPoint presentation or anything like that, but these are just images from around the distillery to give you an idea of the distillery itself, the landscape of Islay, and the size of our stills and all that sort of jazz. But yeah, I'll tell you a bit about the first whiskey we're going to try, and then kind of revisit the background of the distillery and stuff like that. So the first whiskey we're going to taste is the 100% Islay. And at Kilchoman, we produce 2 styles of spirit. one from the barley that we grow ourselves, and one from barley that we buy from the Port Ellen maltings on Islay. So the 100% Islay is made from the barley we grow. We farm about 3,000 acres, and approximately 2,000 acres of that ground that we farm is suitable for growing barley. And so the whole concept with Kilchoman is that, or the original concept with Kilchoman was that we are a farm distillery. Originally when my father built Kilchoman in 2005, he wanted all of our barley, all of our whiskey to be made from barley that we grow. And over the course of like the last 15 years, as the distillery's grown, it's kind of gone from being everything that we make to being slightly less, but it's still about 20-30% of our total production is made from barley that we grow. And this is the 11th edition. So we release one batch of the 100% Islay every year. And the 11th was released in 2021. A batting of 26 bourbon barrels, 7 Oloroso sherry casks. And the style that we produce from the barley that we grow is a slightly lighter, less smoky style than maybe the classic Kilchomans that you might have tasted. So Maccabee, Saneg, they're made from a heavier peated malted barley that we buy in. And yeah, this is lighter. So if you have a nose, there's almost no peat smoke on the nose, just a very faint. I mean, it does depend on how sort of partial to smoky whiskey you are, because if Islay whiskies are something that you really don't enjoy, strange that you're on this tasting in the first place, but if they aren't, then you're probably going to pick up that smoke a bit more than someone who's really into it. But for me, it's very faint, lots of floral, sort of citrus, malty sweetness. And we bottle this at 50%, so it's a slightly higher ABV than most sort of Scotch whiskies. And we just picked that strength because we wanted it to be, a little bit higher, a little bit different from the rest of our whiskies.
It smells pretty smoky to me, but I suppose maybe if you're on Islay drinking,
I had about
Ardbeg and Lefroy, then it's a different story. But
I'm about 60 samples in today, so I was sort of spitting throughout the day, but we're doing a big stock review, so maybe my nose is a bit blown.
Maybe. I mean, we like when we're doing tastings in the bar, and we often end on a peated whiskey, and it's something like a Connemara, which is quite a low 15-20 ppm, and people find it really smoky because they haven't, they've just tried 3 unpeated whiskies. Whereas if you had that at the end of a tasting where you'd had Kilchoman, Ardbeg, a few other Islay whiskies, you probably would think, oh, this is unpeated, So it is all, I suppose, relative to what you've been just consuming beforehand,
Yeah, the smoke does come through much more on the palate, though. I mean, maybe on the nose, the 100% Islay is very floral, very fragrant, very fresh, and then you get a bit more earthy character coming through on the palate. And with this one, no batch or no addition of the 100% Islay is the same. So every year we kind of go back, have a look at the stock in general, and my dad will have a look at kind of what he thinks will be good that year. He'll go into the warehouse, have a taste, and then kind of pull it together. But this is actually quite a sort of, it's 4 vintages, if you like, 4 casks from 4 different years. So that's from the oldest whiskey would have been 2008, and then the youngest whiskey was 2012. So it's minimum 9 years old. It's 4 different barley harvests that we use because of those different vintages. So it's Optic and Publican barley varieties that we use for this one. Each barley variety does give a slightly different flavor, but really the kind of backbone of the flavor structure, if you like, is really the combination of bourbon and sherry casks. So in the past, the 100% Isleys have been quite bourbon barrel dominant, whereas this has got about 40% sherry cask maturation. So there's quite a bit of sort of rich, fruity flavor coming through. And also I think the sherry kind of amps up the smoky side of the whiskey a bit as well.
Yeah, it definitely helps elongate the finish, which in turn makes the smoke linger a bit more. It's incredibly drinkable.
Yeah, it's pretty sort of it's pretty easy going, I think, if you compare it to the rest of our range. And I think, you know, the 100% Isla being a little bit less smoky, I think it actually needs a little bit more time in the cask. I think, I don't know, you know, you'll probably know better than I will actually, but you know, maybe some of the Irish whiskies or the Scotch whiskies in general that are, you know, new to the market, where they've got a bit more smoke to them at that younger age, just gives them a little bit more warmth on the palate, and it doesn't, you know, young unpeated whiskey, you know, that sort of youthfulness can come through quite clearly unless there's, you know, a bit of sherry maturation or wine or peat in the mix, I find.
No, definitely. The smoke helps mask the age, and there's a few new whiskies that have come out recently in Ireland that are good demonstrations of that you know, the 3 and 4 year old peated malts that taste fantastic. It doesn't, you know, you wouldn't think it was that young.
I think part of the reason is because people who like peated whiskies, you know, all of that stuff that they like is most on show when it's relatively young.
No, definitely. The Dave in the chat there says lovely brisket with apricot and prunes, so the fantastic tasting nuts. Keith says really nice, smooth and sweet, very drinkable. I totally concur. You said 3,000 acres you farm on Islay. I didn't realize there was 3,000 acres on Islay.
Yeah, no, there's a few acres on Islay. This is a pretty good, it kind of gives you a pretty good idea for the ground that we farm, you know. So the left there, you can see this, you know, this is what we call the hill ground. And I mean, 3,000 acres is a big chunk of land, but most of it's this, you know, which is only good for sort of grazing sheep. And, you know, so this is used, but mainly only we got a flock of about 300 sheep, and they spend most of their time on the hill. And then, let's keep on moving on, but I'll skip it back. And then down towards the shore there, you can see, I think every time I move or something, it's, I won't move it this time. Anyway, you can see towards the shore there, there's the church on the left, and then coming back towards the distillery is where most of the good barley growing ground is. So, you know, for every acre that you grow, you expect to harvest on Islay, you know, probably about 2 and a bit tons. That'll probably be better in more sort of gentle climates or gentle environments like the east coast of Scotland. And then, you know, from every acre, you're roughly going to get 2.5 barrels of whiskey. So, you know, that 100 acres, 150 acres translates into about 600 or 700 barrels of whiskey by the time it goes all the way through. And we're malting on site as well. So the original concept for the distillery was this farm distillery. You know, my dad was quite brave, I think, really, because he didn't come to Islay and just want to like build a distillery in the same way as everyone else. So he wanted to create this farm distillery, grow his own barley, malt it on site, you know, mature, bottle, do the whole lot. And it's quite an undertaking because there's, you know, though the distilling is actually really the easy part. You know, there's lots of people who can tell you how to distill and give you good advice. You can buy good piece of equipment, but the malting is extremely challenging and really quite hard to get to grips with. And it's taken us probably 6 or 8 years to really get to grips with the floor malting side of you know, especially with our barley, Islay barley, different chemical makeup, just behaves in a different way on the malt floor. So that was quite challenging. And then, you know, warehousing, the easy thing to do would be to send it off to the mainland of Scotland, warehouse it in someone else's warehouses, have someone else bottle it. But, you know, we have our own warehouses on Islay, traditional dunnage warehouses. We bottle ourselves. You know, the very first edition of the 100% Islay, me and my brothers bottled with teapots because we didn't have any bottling equipment. But from there, we've kind of, you know, we now have bottling equipment, you know, proper bottling machines. But it's all kind of grown up, but, you know, it's a big undertaking. And, you know, I admire the approach that my dad took in going into it, you know, full on.
And your dad, Anthony, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was his background before deciding to open a distillery on Islay?
His background was, well, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not traditional sort of Islay, Bowmore High School kind of boy. I'm from we're from Somerset originally. So my dad's family is from Somerset. I lived in Somerset until I was about 10. And then we moved up to Islay, which is where my mum's family are from. My mum's family have been on Islay for about 4 generations. And sort of during that process, originally my dad worked in wine when we were down south. And then when we kind of moved to Islay, he transitioned into independently bottling whiskey. So he was buying, whiskey in the sort of 90s when it was quite easy to get hold of Macallan and Highland Park and stuff like that, and you weren't paying silly prices as an independent bottler. So he did that for a while and saw the growth of single malt whiskey in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and thought that there was space for a new Islay distillery. And he was right, such a following for Islay whiskey and such a thirst for new Islay whiskey or new whiskey in general, that it was great timing, and we've ridden on the coattails of the big Islay distilleries ever since, really.
No, that's fantastic. The Peter Kelly and Martin have a couple of comments in the chat there where Peter says additional sherry definitely adds that smoky barbecue meat note. And 100% agree. And Martin says love that ethos in terms of your grain to glass ethos. So no, that's fantastic.
Yeah. As the sort of distilleries expanded, because my dad built Kilchoman, and you would have seen from the stills, they're very small stills. He built it never thinking that we would produce more than 100,000 liters of alcohol, so about maybe 1,000 casks. So sort of everything at the distillery was set up for that, and then we started making whiskey, started releasing it in 2010, and ever since then we've kind of been chasing our tail a little bit in terms of like expanding the distillery, and then realizing we probably should have expanded a little bit more. And so these days we're filling about 3,000 barrels a year, and of that about 500 to 700 barrels will be made from the barley we grow. It just depends on the harvest, really. So the yield of the harvest is the main factor in terms of how much whiskey we can actually make.
Well, I imagine chasing your tail like that is better than building a huge distillery and realizing you don't have the demand for it. So it's a good problem to have, I imagine.
Yeah, it is good, but sometimes when you're like, oh yeah, we could just some of that and just leaving it for a little while, just so that we can look at our stock spreadsheet and go, okay, well we got a good amount of 10-15-year-old whiskey. At the moment it's still quite short, and one of the questions I get a lot is, when are you going to have a 10-year-old in the core range, and when are you going to have a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, when are you going to have a 25-year-old? And actually I was talking to my dad about it today, and he's absolutely adamant that he will bottle the whiskey when he feels it's best. Everyone who's waiting for whiskey to turn 25 or 30, his opinion is that that's the wrong thing to do. Whiskey is not best at 30 years old. He wouldn't say necessarily when he felt Kilchoman would be best, but he feels that the balance of our spirit and cask that we fill, generally speaking, a Kilchoman between the age of 10 and 16 years old will probably be where a lot of our stock will hit its sweet spot, because we're filling a lot of fresh casks. So a lot of those casks have got a lot to give the whiskey, and so you don't want to mature it on much beyond there. I mean, you can, and you can charge loads of money for it, but he is adamant that I was saying to him today, actually saying we should leave some of these casks, because the difference in price between a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old single cask is massive. So let's just leave it 4 years. And he almost threw me out of the meeting. So I won't be bringing that up again.
Yeah, until you come back around trying to hawk some 25-year-old whiskey on us in a few years' time. Yeah.
This is the best stuff we've ever made.
Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe I'll tell you a bit about the second whiskey. Is that a good time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the Lochgorm 21.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So basically the way our range works is essentially we've got Mackay Bay and Saneg, which are our core range. Just two products in the core range, and they're always available. Mackay Bay is mainly bourbon cask maturation. Saneg is mainly sherry cask maturation. And then each year we have one, limited edition release of 100% Islay, which we just tasted. And then we also release an edition of the Lochgorm. And the Lochgorm is our full sherry maturation brand, if you like. It's always only matured in sherry casks. It's always around about 18 to 25 Oloroso sherry casks, and in recent years it's been kind of anywhere from 9 to 12 years old as a sort of minimum. This is the 2021 version, and it's 24 Oloroso sherry butts, and those were split between two ages, so there was some 9 and some 10-year-old casks in there. We have used smaller casks in the past, smaller sherry casks, but the thing with Lochgorm is, we find that for maturation beyond 6 or 7 years, Oloroso butts, 500 litre Oloroso butts are much better for that slightly longer maturation than hogsheads that we use for Saneg. So the hogsheads are a little bit smaller, give much more intense colour and flavour in a shorter period. But for that longer full maturation in sherry, we only really use Oloroso butts, and these give the whiskey that sort of is a little bit more subtle. If you compared this with maybe Saneg, you get a bit more of the sort of oaky flavour coming through. But with Lochgorm, you still have the richness, and you still have that sort of classic, fruit cake, raisins kind of thing. But it's quite, I quite like it because quite often it sort of gets it's a bit juicy. You get a sort of, it's not like dried up raisins. It's sort of, sultana kind of juicy sort of macerated fruit rather than being too rich and too excessively spicy. And this is different from the 100% Islay because it's the barley that we're buying in as well. So this is a higher peating level.
Well, I must say, I looked up earlier the tasting notes for this on our website, and I don't know if it came from you guys or if it came from Al Higgins or someone in the shop, but they're an interesting read. The aromas of macerated lemons, buttery shortbread, Moroccan spices give way to rich sherry notes and faint notes of peat smoke. So I don't know. I can't picture macerated lemons, to be honest, what they taste like or smell like. But there you go.
That's why I smell like my younger brother. He's the tasting note man with that bulls.
I mean, it sounds great. Dave in the chat there says chestnut and mushroom stuffing for me. That's interesting.
Yeah, you get definitely a little sort of nutty side to it. I mean, it's a classic sherry influenced whiskey in many ways, and I think the unique side with Lochgorm, and one of the reasons it is probably one of the more popular releases that we have, is because it's quite rare to have Islay whiskey that's matured exclusively in sherry casks. You do have sherry matured or sherry dominant whiskies, but this is exclusively in sherry casks, and you don't get a lot of heavily peated Islay whiskies only matured in sherry casks. So I think that combination, firstly, it works very nicely, and it's big, it's bold in terms of the style. So I think it kind of, people remember it as a dram.
No, certainly, and the nose opens up a bit more the longer it's kind of in the glass as well, which is always a good sign.
We bottle this at 46, so it's a slightly lower strength than the 100% Islay. So yeah, and batch to batch this also changes. So my dad selected 24, a particular 24 cast this year, and he's sort of looking into that now, and I think he selected another 24 casts for the release that will come in the spring. And yeah, sherry matured Kilchoman has been much more popular than he probably would have thought. He feels his personal preference is bourbon maturation for Kilchoman, but we're trying quite a lot of sherry influence whiskies this evening in terms of we've got PX, we've got the Fèche, which is also got a good whack of sherry maturation in it. And his preference is probably to use like a base of bourbon barrel maturation and then add a little bit of richness with the sherry. He does that, a lot with the vattings. So something like Maccabee is quite similar to that, and then the Fèche that we'll finish on, that's his whiskey all over it. It's got Anthony Wells written all over it in terms of the vatting. So
no, very good. And for €80, I mean, this is an exceptional whiskey, I think, in that kind of price point. I mean, I don't know if people listening in agree, but the getting value for money in the Irish market these days is quite hard. So for €80, this is an excellent one to have as one to crack open in the evening, especially now it's getting colder outside.
Yeah, we've got lots of Irishmen who need to pay for their expensive distilleries. That's the trouble.
Well, do you have much of that's very true, but do you have much of a duty-free presence? Because I was only over in the UK a couple of weeks ago for the first time since Brexit hit, and it was great. I cleaned up in duty-free with all the whiskeys and the cigarettes I brought home. It was great.
We have in the past. We've had a duty-free, like a UK duty-free exclusive called Saligo Bay. Or no, in the UK it was called Cool Point, and it was available for a while, but sort of like classic duty free. They're very, very greedy, and so you only deal with them if you really have to. And at the moment we don't really have to, so we haven't been courting that business too much. I think you'll see us around and about, but it's quite an expensive place for an independent distiller to be. So it's not a market we're focusing really on at the moment. The European markets for us are the big area of growth. Germany and France have been growing like mad.
They love a peated whiskey down there.
Yeah, and with everyone stuck at home as well, I think where they maybe were partial to a Lafroig or a Lagavulin or an Ardbeg, maybe they're now buying a bottle of Kilchoman and seeing what that's all about as well.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the distillery itself, we're now producing around about 500,000 litres a year. So we've kind of transitioned from being, a genuinely quite small distillery to somewhere in the middle, really. I think the other island distilleries are probably starting, the next step up from us is around about 1 million litres a year. And then it goes all the way up to Kalila, who I think next year they're planning to produce, 6 or 7 million litres of alcohol. But we're only producing for single malt. So we're not selling any spirit for blending or for independent bottling. We're keeping it all ourselves, putting it in the best casks we can find. So the sherry casks come from Miguel Martin, a producer called Miguel Martin in Spain. He supplies a lot of sherry casks to the whiskey industry. I don't think his sherries are necessarily going to win any big awards, but his sherry casks are good. They suit our whiskey very well. They're very consistent as well. So consistency is probably the most important thing. If you find something that you like in a cask, every time you go back and order more, you want them to be exactly the same as the last ones.
Yeah,
so he's very good at that. And then
I suppose the best sherry producers aren't necessarily the best sherry cask producers, because the best sherries often never touch a cask that's ever used in whiskey maturation. So it's two very different skills, I suppose. Seasoning a cask and running a proper Solero system. Like,
yeah, well, I think Miguel he supplies all of the big sort of, well, not necessarily the big ones, not Macallan necessarily, because I think they sort out their own supply, but the likes of Glenfarclas and Glenallachie, Tamdhu, the sort of classic sherry matured Scotch whiskies. He's supplying casks, those guys. and we're buying, the Oloroso cask room. We're also buying the PX as well, which we'll taste up next. But he supplies, we bought Finos and all sorts of them in the past. But casks are important, really, really important. The guys who are on here will know how important the casks are. So the sherry casks, which are probably about 20% of our fillings, what we're filling, they come from Miguel, and then our bourbon barrels come from only from Buffalo Trace Distillery. So we're not buying through a cooperage, we're just buying from Buffalo Trace directly. Again, it's about consistency. It's also about the freshness of the casks. So we sort of originally we were buying from Speyside Cooperage over here in Scotland, and they were sourcing from numerous different distilleries in America. And in 2008, we switched to exclusively buying from Buffalo Trace Distillery in Kentucky. And the consistency is a huge factor in why we did that. We're always getting bourbon made in the same way. So we're also, as well as Buffalo Trace produce like 6 or 8 different styles of whiskey, we're only buying, particular brands that they produce for particular mash bills. So they're incredibly consistent, and then they're shipped directly to us. So they're loaded onto a container in Kentucky, and however long they take to get over here, whether it's a month or 2 months, we fill them as soon as we can. So that's a huge factor when you're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old whiskey. Freshness of cask is huge. If you're putting all this effort into making fantastic spirit off the stills, and then you're not buying good casks. And I don't mean just talking about buying good casks. I mean actually going out and and sourcing, really good, consistent casks. Then you're barking up the wrong tree, because it's not going to end up any good until it's 10 or 15 years at least.
Yeah, we did an antique collection tasting from Buffalo Trace on Saturday night. That was our William Louis Weller and Eagle Rare 17 and Sazerac 18 and that kind of thing. How difficult was that relationship, and how common or uncommon is that type of relationship in terms of, like, I mean, Sazerac now are making huge inroads into the UK and Irish market over the last 5 or so years. They're really kind of flexing their muscles this side of the Atlantic, and was that, obviously you're saying this started in 2008, so it's obviously before most of that. Is that how does that dynamic work?
Well, we were introduced by Jim Swan, who was kind of the guy who worked with my dad to set up the distillery. He was a consultant. He sadly passed away, but he's very well known, extremely knowledgeable guy. And he was up with guys at Buffalo Trace. There's one old boy who deals with the selling of the casks at Buffalo Trace, and we sort of, I think we're quite straightforward to deal with. We take what we say we're going to take when we take it, and we pay for them, and I think it's just been fairly seamless. I don't think it would necessarily be as easy to go along these days and approach Buffalo Trace and say, we want to buy your casks exclusively. And I don't think the timing was good when we did it in 2008. But then also, I think oh gosh, there was another part of the question which I've now forgotten what it was. But
no, I think that was the most of the question, in terms of how difficult that was. Yeah, is there anyone else with similar relationships with, not necessarily just Sazerac, but other brands?
I don't think so. I've done a lot of tastings with other brands, and I'm always nervous to say that it's a really unique thing that we do, but it seems like it is quite unique. I think mainly because distilleries don't want to go through the faff of organizing this supply chain of casks from one side of the Atlantic to the other, so it is quite a lot of work to arrange for the shipping of these containers of casks, because you need a fairly steady stream of casks. You can't fit that many barrels in a container whole, so that's why a lot of cooperages and such, they'll break down the casks and then reassemble them in Scotland. We absolutely would never do that. That's the whole kind of defeats the whole purpose. So I don't think there are many people doing it, whether it's with Sazerac or whether it's with others. I haven't been in a tasting or heard people talk about it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. There's Yeah, I mean there is. I mean, obviously, because you imagine, obviously, Brown Forman have a, what are they,
Yeah,
Glendronach and a few other brands. You think, like, I've no idea, but you assume it's logical that with that relationship that they're sourcing casks, I mean,
yeah,
casks
yeah.
directly or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is. I mean, maybe it's just not something that they think is worth talking about. I'm not sure.
yeah.
But for us, it's a big deal. You know,
Hmm.
it's important.
No, that's fantastic. No, brilliant. Will we come on to the PX?
Yeah, yeah. So so the PX is a limited, a sort of special edition, as we call them. You know, so we have limited editions like Loch Gorm and 100% Isla, and they kind of come around every year. But the PX and other things like, you know, Fino Sherry or Port Maturation, Madeira, other kind of unique cask types that we use, they tend to be a bit more one-off. You know, we won't necessarily plan to do that every year, certainly not, or maybe every other year. And the PX matured is 33 casks. 9 of them, so 9 of the 33 casks that we selected were only matured in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, and 24 of the 33 casks that we selected were finished in the PX cask for between 12 and 18 months. So it's a sort of, what is it, a 2/3 or, you know, more than that finished, you know, 1/3 roughly full maturation. And we did that because we're mainly using fresh casks, you know, so fresh PX casks. They have a huge amount of intensity that is transferred into the whiskey in a pretty short space of time. So you need to kind of temper that a little bit. And we did that by using the bourbon barrels. I also think, you know, finishing has probably got a bit of a bad name within the last sort of 10 years. You know, I think people have kind of maybe done it for the wrong reasons, you know, just sort of stick it in a sherry cask. We can charge an extra, you know, 20 quid for it. But you know, there are real occasions when, particularly when you're using really intense sweet casks, where it's a, I think if you want a bit of age on the whiskey as well, it's kind of the only approach to take, because you know, a full maturation, unless it's a second or third refill cask, you're only going to be able to take that to 5 or 6 years maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So there are scenarios where finishing is the better approach to take, certainly with Kilchoman. And so that's why we went for this combination of full maturation and also some finishing. But you get the PX sweetness straight away. You know, with the Oloroso, you're getting much more richness. With the Pedro Jimenez, much more, you know, overtly sweet, syrupy, brown sugar kind of flavors coming through.
It's quite it's much lighter on the nose, or not, maybe not lighter, but fresher. It's less intense than the Loch Gorm.
Yeah.
But not necessarily, not at all in a bad way, but just it's quite a marked difference. But
yeah, so I mean the Olorosos can take the whiskey quite earthy. Generally with the PX, it tends to take the whiskey more of a sort of rounded, soft, sweet, you know, easy drinking kind of direction. You know, so we've done some cask strength, you know, single cask at PX maturation, and that stuff's lethal. You know, you drinking it like it's sort of at 46%. Before you know it, you've fallen off your chair and you look to the bottle and realize it was 58%. So yeah, it really sort of rounds it out, dampens down the peat smoke a little bit, and you get all that, you know, real intense sort of sweetness coming through. We bottled this we didn't have quite enough. Well, we wanted to bottle it at slightly higher strength. We were hoping to bottle it at 50 ABV, but we kind of settled on 46, 47 and a bit, just so that, you know, we got a bit more intensity into it. I think PX at a lower strength, you kind of lose some of that slightly sort of lighter elements to the whiskey. When you bring it down in strength, you tend to sort of take it more towards the sort of earthy end, whereas we wanted to keep it a little bit higher, just to retain some of that sort of citrusy sweetness as well. And just while this is up, actually, so these are our new stills. Oh, let's do something else. I didn't set it long enough. But yeah, These are our new stills. So we have two sets of stills at Kilchoman. We have an original set and then newer set, which were put in 2019, identical. And that was part of the expansion that we went through.
They're beautiful. How often do you polish them?
We don't polish them. This was obviously taken quite soon after they were installed. But we're using that picture for a long time.
Yeah, no, they look great. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
genuinely, I'm not being sarcastic.
No, the Forsyth stills are. I mean, the guys at Forsyth, we specified that we don't want any joins, any flanges and anything. And it just makes for an absolutely stunning still when you don't have any joints with bolts and stuff poking out. But the stills, our stills are very small, and that's a big factor in the balance of flavor. Because my father, he didn't want to produce an Islay whiskey that was just massive peat smoke. He wanted it to be very much an Islay whiskey, but have something a little bit different to offer. So those are the original stills there. And so we've got the wash still. Is a wash still really. It serves a purpose. It increases the alcohol strength on the first distillation. The spirit still, with the reflux bulb there, it's a very small still for a start, so you've got more copper contact, which helps with the reflux. But then with the reflux bulb there, just at the base of the neck of the still, that helps again with the reflux. So these two elements really help lighten up the spirit from something that's really quite heavily peated. So the core range Kilchoman is 50 ppm, so more peated than the likes of Lafroig and as peaty as Ardbeg. But I think when you taste our whiskies, they're a little bit on the lighter end compared to those whiskies. And that's because of the stills, and also our cut points. We take a pretty small cut. We're only collecting down to 65.5 ABV, so we're only really collecting that lighter end of the spirit run, which helps balance the peat smoke with a bit of tropical fruit, citrus, floral sweetness, as well as actually when you're taking that finer cut, it means that you don't need an excessively long maturation. If you're taking a wider cut, taking in more of that earthy flavor, you're probably going to need to mature it on for another couple of years than Kilchoman is typically. So
yeah, no, we on for I don't know how many people on the chat were joined us for our Redbreast tasting last Thursday, but they Middleton make a virtue of obviously the when they make their cut off different distillations. They claim that they effectively produce 3 different styles of whiskey that are all produced in the cut. It's not the mash bill, the stills are the same, but the cut can vary it so much. So it's amazing, all the different factors. We did on the Celtic Whiskey Pod, which is our podcast for anyone who's listening who hasn't heard it. It's worth checking out. But we interviewed Mark Rainier recently, and he was obviously talking about terroir and all that. So when you have one person going into like this huge detail on this is the difference terroir makes in the flavor, and then you have Middleton saying this is the huge difference the cut makes in the flavor, and then so it's all these different elements are fascinating. I suppose it's why we're all sitting here as whiskey enthusiasts.
Well, Luke, next time you're on Islay, you should come. And one thing we do is that we have people who can spend a bit of time in the still house. If you taste through the spirit run, so taste as it first comes in, and then taste it after 5 minutes, then after 15, and our spirit run lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. And you taste it through the spirit run, and you compare the first sample with the last sample of the whiskey that will go into the barrel. You stark difference. So spirit cuts. The trouble is, as with everything, spirit cuts are very important, but yeast is very important, and some people will tell you that wooden washbacks are the absolute key to quality single malt whiskey. So we're all at it. We're all telling you that everyone else is doing it wrong. What you need to be doing is what we do.
Yeah, well, I'll be on Islay in February or March, so I'll hold you to that. I'll call in and get a taste of the different runs.
No, definitely. We did a tasting, a virtual tasting. My dad did it, and we actually sent out the samples. We did it for our festival last year, and I think it was maybe 5 minutes 10 minutes, 30 minutes, and then the new make as it is when it goes into the barrels. And it's very interesting. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But the beauty with Scotch whiskey is that there's so many different factors that go into the flavor of the whiskey that you know everyone's right. Mark Radio.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's what's exciting about the explosion in Irish whiskey recently. That up until 10 years ago, you had 3 distilleries on the island, 2 of them triple distilled. So they up until 2004, 2 of them were on. 2 of the 3 were the one company. So you had if whatever I'm not saying no criticism, they're fantastic companies, but whatever is their part of their USP and their idea of how they're going to market the whiskey defined what Irish whiskey was to the world, and now you have all these new distilleries that are challenging that, saying, oh no, we this is our new thing, we're double distilling, we're focusing on terroir, we're focusing on this side of maturation, and it's brilliant. It's healthy for the industry.
Yeah, it's got everyone all confused on every single level.
Exactly. In speaking of that, before we come on to the next one, when your father was opening the distillery 15 years ago, was there other particular brands that served as inspiration? And there's a lot of similarities to what you've discussed here that you might hear when you were in Springbank or down distillery like that. So was there any particular distillery or set of distilleries that served as a model or an example?
I think at the time he looked at Ardbeg a lot because when Kilchoman was sort of going through the construction phase, Ardbeg were fairly new into their sort of resurrection, if you like. They were releasing stuff like Still Young and whatever and stuff like that, which was young Islay whiskey. It was getting a real following. It was distinctly smoky, and it was sort of being talked about in a way that my dad quite liked. So I think probably in terms of certainly of an Islay distillery that we would look at, it's probably Ardbeg. But I don't know. I think as we've sort of established ourselves, we've become more confident in what we do and the style of whiskey we want to put out. I think in the early days, you look around and you're sort of desperately trying to figure out where you sit within everything. And then once you kind of have your little niche, I think we're quite comfortable with, we've never gone out there and tried to sort of produce a massive range of styles of whiskey. It's always been quite focused. So we're quite, we did look at Ardbeg in those early years, but now I think we kind of go about things in our own way and justify it. My dad justifies it however he wants to justify it to himself, really. So he doesn't have anyone to answer to. That's the beauty of being an independent distillery. You can make a decision because you work out got out of bed a certain way. I know when I get an email at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and my dad's been thinking about it on his morning walk, and I need to get on with it straight away. So it's some of the intricacies of family business.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. There's a couple of comments in there and tasting notes while we're chatting. So Martin faces lots of lovely sweet fruity tastes initially. The finish is bigger than I anticipated. I certainly agree with the finish being bigger, and the finish is quite juicy. It kind of leaves you salivating, which is obviously which we didn't get in the first two. Maybe that's the drier sherry components maybe kicking in. As in the first two were drier, obviously the PX is much sweeter. Keith says the citrus on the nose of the PX is fantastic. The peat grew greater on the palate the more I drank. So yeah, that's I totally agree. So two great comments there.
Yeah, no, it works well, PX and Kilchoman. I think sometimes I think you look at it as a slightly sort of, I don't know, sometimes it lacks a bit of finesse, but I think that's not necessarily true of this one. But I think sometimes when it's not, sometimes it doesn't come together quite so well. Maybe the casts are just left a little bit too long in terms of the full maturation. So I think with the finishing done in the way we have done it, I think it allows, my dad or whoever's putting together the whiskey to just really fine tune it with the cast, that maybe some of the casts have been finished for 12 months, some of them have been finished for 18 months, and or longer. and so you can just dial up or dial down the sort of the sweetness of the sherry a bit. So I think that's something we'll do more of when it comes to wine cask maturations, where we're releasing it in anything other than a single cask. We'll do a portion in full maturation and then look to potentially use some finished casks as well.
Interesting.
Shall I tell you a bit about the Saturn cask then?
Yes, let's come on to it. Sorry, I was captivated by the blue in the barrels there.
Yeah, we can't be asked to do that anymore. Look how
I can imagine.
Yeah, that was back in the days where we were filling about like 20 barrels a week. All of them beautifully painted right around to the edge. Now it's sort of slap of paint, cover up what was there before, but no less care in terms of the liquid, just the painting of the cask. So this is the only single cask we're gonna taste, but single cask is a big part of what we do. My dad, coming from a sort of independent bottling background, he's always been mad keen on single cask whiskey and cask strength whiskey. So we released probably, we actually sold probably more than we wanted to sell last year. We sold about 130 single casks of whiskey around the world, and this is one that we bottled for sort of kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's a cask that we don't sell to a specific market or a specific retailer. It's one that kind of is available for people to buy in a couple of cases, and I think we sent Ali a couple of cases, and it's a Saturn finish, so it's a 6-year-old single cask matured in a bourbon barrel, and this is actually only 6 months finish in Saturn, which is pretty short. I have, because this was all sold it was sent out to markets. This is cask 706 2014, and I managed to find the next one up, 707. So but this has got a slightly longer finish on it, so I'm not tasting exactly what you guys are tasting, but the Saturn, even with a relatively short finish, the Saturn comes through typically more on the nose. You get that kind of creamy Saturn sweetness coming through. Sometimes it's kind of like a sort of appley pudding, that kind of malty, biscuity sweetness. So that comes through more on the nose, and then because it's the bulk of the maturation has been in bourbon, it tends to come through a little bit more. The bourbon comes through a little bit more in terms of the palate. And this being 6 months, this is pretty short. I'm surprised. My dad tastes everything before they go out in terms of single cask size, so he won't allow stuff to go out if he's not happy with it. But this is on the shorter side for a finish. So I'll rely on you guys telling me how much or how little Saturn influence there is, because as I said, this one's got a year, the one that I'm tasting, and it's got a huge amount of Saturn influence.
Well, I definitely, it's stunning on the nose. There's something very familiar about it, in the sense that it reminds me of something that I can't quite put my finger on. But definitely, as you say, that biscuity, kind of fruity, appley, and the first sip I just took there was almost very tannic at the front, and then that quickly dispersed into some of those more kind of orchard fruit, kind of vanilla flavors. It's a gorgeous whiskey. I must say, I can't think I need more time to think about it. So I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say. But no, I hadn't tried that. I've tried most of these before. I've tried older editions of the 100% Island and Loch Gorham, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a fair amount of. I think originally we filled. So the first Saturn maturation of Kilchoman was a full maturation. I think it was about 6 years old, and it was only matured in Saturn. And some people really liked it. Personally, I thought it got a bit flabby. It didn't have the sort of structure to it, and I personally think that the Saturn casks work much better as the finish, and that's how we've used them recently. We do have some more full maturation coming through for release in the next couple of years, but I think it works very nicely because I think the bourbon gives it real structure. With the Saturn being a slightly lower ABV than other cask types that we used. I don't know, for whatever reason, it didn't quite have the structure, and so I think with the bourbon maturation, you have that's the structure of the caramel, the vanilla, and then that works very nicely with the finishing period with the Saturn, adding lots of that creamy white grape sweetness around it. So I think and especially at cask strength. So this was 56%. So that kind of again allows for that sweetness to really come through. I think with a bit of water, maybe the sort of tannic, the earthy side will come out a little bit more. Maybe a bit of the fruitiness as well. But at that full strength, I think it's that sweetness really shines.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to add a drop of water and see what happens, because I remember we did I think it was Aaron tasting we did earlier in the year last year, where they had a Saturn cask on it. That was one of our most popular whiskies from that kind of few months of tastings in that period. Everyone was talking about it afterwards, that how good it was. So but it's obviously not a cask that you encounter that frequently, so it's quite interesting. I think there's a fantastic Glendronach 12-year-old in the Saturn cask finish that we have in the bar in Clarny. That's a very drinkable whiskey, but obviously nothing like this, and given the peat and the chalk and cheese. But it's they're still great whiskies. But
well, if it's one you want, this one, the 707, has just been bottled, so it's it will have another 6 months or so on it. So there'll be we could send a couple of cases over to Killarney. I'm going to say it wrong. I won't even try. We'll send a couple of cases your way.
No, Killarney, you said it right the first time. Yeah. Killarney is easy. It's same as Kilchoman. I imagine. What does like the Kill is church, obviously, in Gaelic. What's the Coman? So
Kilchoman was the guy who built the church, basically.
Fair enough.
He was the brother of a very, very holy man, and I read about this too long ago to know the actual details. But essentially, Kill, much like every other town in Ireland and Scotland, is church, and then it's the name following means all sorts of things. Usually related to the landscape, I think, more so than people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know like Arnie is sloes, like slow berries. So it's actually literally Church of the Sloes. I'm not sure why, but that's literally what it translates at. There's lots of like little townlands and parish, like not even parishes, just little townlands rurally here that have killed something like Killoan and different things down in Kerry that no one knows where the origin is. Like, there's like there's a clone distillery in Northern Ireland. There's something to do with the clone I'm talking about, but the clone locally here, I think they think there might have been a religious hermit there once upon a time, maybe in the 5th or 6th century, and that his name was Owen. So that, there's just no, the origins of it is lost to time, so we'll never know. But fascinating stuff either way.
Yeah, no, I mean the Kilchoman, the parish of Kilchoman is actually a real hotbed for, actually ancient and modern sort of history, and well, not that ancient, but ancient history in terms of Islay anyway. So you've got the stuff like the church there, which is sadly ruined, but you got the cross, which is one of the earliest Iona style crosses in the churchyard there. And then more recently you've got a couple of sort of tragedies in terms of like sinkings of American troop ships and things like that, and there's monuments to that, and all sorts. So it's quite an interesting little part of the island actually, and one of the most fertile little pockets of ground. It's all around. You've got these green fields. There was a drone shot taken the other day. It's literally green fields, and then it's brown everywhere. So it's hill ground, rocky, craggy hill ground, and then there's a little pocket of green. So.
No, it looks beautiful. I look forward, if I do ever get to Ireland in February or March, as I mentioned, it would be my first time visiting. So I've been looking forward to it. Myself and my partner, who also works in the industry, had planned a trip for last year, but obviously COVID got in the way. So we're we're looking to reschedule for next year, but we'll see. We'll see how, we might all be in lockdown again by then. So I don't want to get too excited about it.
Make sure you get in touch, because nothing more annoying when people visit the distillery and think, oh no, I won't hassle them to let them know I'm coming. No, let me know when you're coming, and we'll set some stuff up for you.
Wow. Thanks, James. We better get back
the
to
rest of you. You can don't get in touch.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say we better get back to the product of hand, because all of you listening home will be like, oh, look at these two dickheads. Like, let's get to the whiskey. So yeah, we'll go for the you pronounced it differently than I did earlier on. So the Fesh Isle is how I would have said it, but you were saying.
Yeah, well, one of my colleagues, when I say it wrong, and I'm going to say it wrong because she always tells me I'm saying it wrong, but my understanding of the way it should be said is Feis Isle, so Festival of Isla, essentially. So the whiskey festival, Feis, as it's commonly known, happens every May. In normal times, the island's full of the geekiest of whiskey geeks in all their glory, and they're all clamoring around to get the festival releases, which all the distilleries make available on their open day, essentially. So we open up on the Thursday of the festival, and we have bands, and we have tastings and tours and everything. And each year we release a special bottling, and it's probably the most significant it's a big event in my dad's calendar, or he'll certainly always have casts in mind for the Feis releases. So he'll always have something, or a couple of batches of casts that he thinks, oh yeah, they'll come good for next year, or I'll reserve them, make sure no one bottles them or they don't disappear for whatever reason. So we always try and put our, because it's a real comparison. So typically, the guys who come to Ireland, they'll buy each one from the distilleries, and then they'll sit down and critique each one.
Yeah.
You don't want to be at the bottom of the list. So this past Feis, so we couldn't have people at the distillery, but we did a bottling. Normally we're actually the only distillery which don't make it available outside of anyone coming to the distillery. So it's normally only available to people who are at the distillery on the day, and it's limited to one bottle per person. Most of the other distilleries, release it maybe even worldwide, or at least beyond the island, but we keep it quite restricted. But last year, we couldn't do that, because we wouldn't have sold very many bottles if we'd done that, because we were obviously shut. So we did make it available online, and the bottling was two 10-year-old sherry butts. So they were two 2011 sherry butts, and then we selected 6 2012 bourbon barrels. So 6 9-year-old bourbon barrels and 2 10-year-old sherry butts that we selected. So it sounds like it's predominantly bourbon maturation, but actually it's about 50-50, because it's the butts are significantly bigger than the barrels. So it's around about 50-50 bourbon sherry maturation, 9-10 years old. And it was 2,800 bottles that we released, 56.3%. And this is made from our barley. So this is the 100% Islay spirit that we produce. So it's lighter peating level. And generally speaking, it's just that much more floral. And I have an open bottle at home, and there is a bottle of it on my dad's shelf behind me, but he wouldn't let me open it. So I don't have it. I have a 2010 vintage, which is a similar age, similar maturation profile, but not a cask strength. But this is, I remember tasting everything. This is designed to be a classic Kilchoman in many ways, so that combination of bourbon and sherry is something you see a lot with Kilchoman. And parallels, it'll have a lot of parallels to the first whiskey.
I was literally going to say, because with the first one, you said you'd nearly not noticed it was peated on the nose. Well, after having the middle three, it definitely there's a distinct absence of that kind of peatiness on the nose, 100%.
Yeah, so that's typical of the 100% Isla, and yeah, you're gonna have, it's roughly the same. Just looking back at my notes here, actually, it's roughly the same age, and also roughly the same cast type. The key difference will be that these were truly hand selected casts. So you can have the natural variance between same cast types is huge. So these were truly hand selected, and I remember it being very, very sort of fruity. Lots of stone fruits. Not so much of the sort of spiciness of the sherry, much more of the fruitiness of the sherry coming through. So, but I'm gonna have to, well, Luke, I sprung the last one on you, so maybe I can else before you give me your thoughts. But
no, it's really, really fruity, like incredibly fruity on the nose. Definitely kind of peachy and stone fruit. The David in the chat actually has, or Dave, has a comment from the previous whiskey, where he says really liking this one, the hint of peach and top of the nuttiness I love from this Sauterne finish. But on this one, Martin Face is the first and last are definitely my favorites, and I can it's definitely like I've really enjoyed all of them so far, but this one is definitely, having gone through the three kind of more smoky ones, this suddenly feels a bit more approachable and a bit more welcoming in a way. And I love peated, but it's kind of nice to break up that rhythm as well, like
yeah. No, I think weirdly the sort of 100% Isla whiskies that we produce, that they really have taken just that little bit more time to kind of come good, and I think the face, it was certainly, I remember, well, I've got a bottle at home, I'm down to like this much though, so I need to get home and knock it on the head. But yes, it's lovely, fruity, rounded sherry maturation. For me, I think if you're a real island nut, I think maybe it just doesn't have that kind of hit in terms of the smoke, but perhaps that's made up for with the higher strength. With the cask strength, I think that gives it much more weight on the palate. So no, it's lovely. And I think with the 100% Isla as well, it's very different to distill. So the guys will tell you the 100% Isla, our barley is much more volatile in the stills, and so it's chemically it's different. And for me, it comes through as this real sort of silky, floral, citrus, oily texture on the palate. And more so with the sherry maturation, that kind of adds to it as well. So
yeah, but it's definitely get that oily, a bit more. There's a bit more presence in terms of viscousness. I found with the first one and this last one, I actually have a bit more the first time. I have a 100% Isla, have a taste, but it almost seems like a bit more of a charcoaly piece. Like it's a different character to the smoke altogether than the middle ones. The Keith Madden in the chat has said that the Loch Gorman is the pick for me. Caught me by surprise. So that one's his favorite. Sorry, I'm still kind of digesting this one here. That's why I'm not saying anything interesting. But
you're seeing all the pictures of our team in the background, and this is a slightly outdated picture of me and my brothers and my dad, taken quite a while ago, I think. But yeah, we have about, even though we're the smallest distillery on the island, we actually have we're the second biggest employer of the distilleries. So we have about 40 people now at the distillery. And I mean, we also do a lot more than the other distilleries. So a lot of them are, maybe farming or malting or doing the warehousing, doing the bottling. We have a really good visitor center as well. So, you'll see that when you're over, but it's a great visitor setup. You can see the whole process, particularly in late summer, where you can see the barley, we malt on the floor maltings year round, but you can see the barley in the summer, you can see the maltings happening. We're a bit of an open book, so we're not going to keep you out of certain areas or tell you to turn your phones off or not take any pictures. You can ask whatever you like, look at whatever you like, and you can see the whole process all the way through to bottling, and it's a very sort of, it's probably grown up a little bit in the last couple of years. So when we first started off, we had a cattle shed opposite the still house, and now that's sort of been all tidied up and things. So sometimes I miss the smell of cow shit, but most of the time I do. But it's a nice place to visit, and you know, being on Isla, you know, there's you're never short of things to see and stuff to drink. So anyone who's thinking about coming over to visit us and the other distilleries, you know, you should definitely get a date in the diary to do it, because you won't be disappointed. It's a great place to come and see.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds fantastic. I suppose the last question is not for you, and it's for everyone else who's listening in, where we get everyone to rank their favorites. I know Keith has already said Loch Gorm is the pick for him. So we'd love to hear from everyone else who wants to rank their preference or what kind of caught them by surprise. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we finished up, James? And before I thank you for this amazing experience.
It's fine. No, I don't think so. I mean, if anyone, you know, if you have any questions pop into your head, you know, by all means get in touch. You know, through our website, it's probably the easiest. It just gets sent on to me. You know, I'll get back to you within the day, kind of thing. So if you have any questions, just, you know, head over to the website or send us on social media or whatever. It'll get to me pretty easily. So yeah, but thanks. I mean, thanks for the guys who joined, and if you're joining, you know, on the recording, then I hope you enjoyed it as well. Oh,
brilliant. Vitaly here says, I only tried the Makir Bay and Sanig before, and now you have my full trust. There he's all in now. All tonight's stuff is very good. Honestly, my vote is for PX, so fantastic. This is 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. So that would be the 4 was obviously the Saturn cask, and then the Fesh Isle afterwards. Emily says all were amazing, and she goes Fesh, and then 100% Isle of barley, and then 4, 2, 3. So very good. So this you know, a contrast. There's not one. Often when we do this James, there's a clear. I loved the 21-year-olds, you know, but the rest were nice. So it's good. It's good when there's not a clear winner. I think that's testament to what you're doing there. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for, before we finish, actually, Peter says Loch Gorm and then Fesh Isle, and Martin says 5, 1, 3, 2. So that's fantastic. Well, thank you, James, for giving up your Monday evening to spend it with us, and thank you to everyone who joined us live, and for everyone who's watching back on the recording. It's much appreciated. And as James said, if there's any questions that come to you after the fact, or if you're listening to this not live and you have a few questions, if you just email them to the same email address you got the Zoom link in, and we'll get them addressed, or as James says, you can get onto the pester someone on the Kilchoman Twitter account. That's the other way to do it.
I go for it. Makes a nice break from doing real work.
Brilliant. Do you run are you on the socials yourself in behind the brand, or do you have a team there?
I was for a while, and then I sort of gave up on it all. But I monitor it, but I'm not actively on the social media stuff. So yeah, much better to send me a message through the website or something like that. Say for James, for forwarding to James, and it'll get to me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, James. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys on another Celtic Whiskey Fest night over the next few days, I'm sure. And I'll hopefully see you maybe in a few months if you're there when at the same time I visit Isla, James.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. We'll see you. Bye.